We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Hello listeners, this is Paula Schaffner with episode 40, The Night They Raided Minsky's. And the title not only includes Mork's nickname for Mindy, but it is a very obvious reference to the 1968 musical comedy movie called The Night They Raided Minsky's, without a D, which was written and produced by Norman Lear and starred Elliot Gould and Burt Lahr, among others. This episode first aired on January 10th, 1980. The IMDb synopsis is, Mork haplessly gets involved with a group of white supremacists. As you may guess, there are some ethnic slurs in this episode, which I will be quoting. They are not as harsh as they could be. They're about on a level of what you would have heard on All in the Family in the early 70s. This episode was the 31st, directed by Howard Storm. It was the 4th, written by Ed Sharlock, and the 6th by Tom Tenowich. Among the things that they had previously written, they co-authored Mork's Mixed Emotions. We start with the daytime exterior of the deli, and there's snow on the ground, as there will be in all of the exteriors where we can see the ground. Remo is serving an overweight bearded man, and Mindy and Nelson are eating at the next table. Nelson says he supposes Mindy is wondering why he called this lunch, as if it's a meeting. Mindy guesses it's because Nelson is hungry. He says lunches aren't for eating, they're for deducting. So apparently he's going to write this off. They're here to discuss his campaign. She asks if he really thinks he can get elected to city council, so she's still skeptical months later. He suggests they consult the Vox Populi, the voice of the people. So he asks the bearded man if he knows who Nelson is. The man says, "No, who are you?" And Nelson tells Mindy there's a natural curiosity about him. This man, by the way, is uncredited. I'm going to guess that he's probably one of the writers on the series, because that would happen a lot on Gary Marshall's series, where the writers would take credited and uncredited roles, but no idea who he is, actually. We can hear the sounds of parade music. Mork on a bullhorn is saying, "Say it! Win with flavor! Say it with me now!" And he just keeps campaigning. He says you'll hear from the old man himself, even though Nelson is obviously not old. Mindy is understandably surprised that there's a parade for Nelson. Nelson is touched and says, "My gosh, it's starting! Flavor mania!" Mork enters with a straw campaign hat, a bullhorn, and a tape recorder that's strapped on. There's applause. Remo comes over and asks about the noise. He tells Mork to turn the tape recorder off because people are trying to eat. Mork does, but the bullhorn has feedback. The bearded man somehow drops his burger. I couldn't tell. Maybe he's just startled. Remo picks it up and says he'll wash it off, and then he offers to give the man a new one. The man wants a cheeseburger this time. Remo grabs the bullhorn, which honks, and then he exits, presumably to the kitchen, to make a cheeseburger. Mork takes off his hat and sits at the table with Nelson and Mindy. Nelson says, "A one-man parade. I think I have a goosebump," so he's less impressed now. Mork says it's a privilege campaigning for him, and he calls him your flavorship. He's been knocking on doors, peeking in windows, kissing mothers, and shaking babies. It's wonderful. He's been gathering the grassroots and distributing them to the young people, who've been going, "Wow, this flavor, it's really nice." So, a drug joke. Obviously, Mork's style of campaigning is not going to help Nelson. And it's up with the stoner vote. Mork says that Nelson's posters didn't fit into Mork's parade concept, so he ripped them up into confetti, but they're numbered, so he hands Nelson a part that only a mother could love. Nelson wonders what's the use. No one knows who he is, even though he just said that there was interest in him. Mork says the bright side is Nelson could make a total fool of himself, and he could go on national TV and say, "My fellow Americans, I'd like to show you the dancing weasel." Pretty suggestive. Nelson says what he needs is one organized group of people who can support him. Mindy says, "Don't look at her. What can she do?" He says he knew he could get her to go there for him tonight. He's supposed to speak at the gathering of the International Ladies Garment Workers. Mork suggestively says that Nelson is going to take a peek at their union label. And it would have made sense if he wanted Mindy to go speak to them. He says he'd do anything to win these women over. He'd even listen to them sing. But at the same time, there's a meeting for the committee to clean up Boulder. He thinks there's some new conservation group. He wants Mindy to go and let them know that he deeply cares about whatever it is they stand for. So again, this thing of Nelson not having any actual positions, just running and campaigning for the sake of it. Mindy says she'd love to help him out, but tonight she's got a student teaching seminar and it's really important to her. She's got to go. And I couldn't tell if this was something she was making up or if she actually did have this. I think she was going, but she's also relieved that she has an excuse. Nelson says it's a shame he can't find anyone to go tonight. Mork whoops and enthusiastically waves. Mindy says she thinks Nelson found a volunteer. Nelson says, all right, he'll appoint Mork, but Mork has to remember that he's going to be Nelson's representative. Don't do anything he wouldn't do.
Would you do this? No. Pity.
As it'll turn out, it might have been better if Mork had done that instead. We have here the thing of Mork and Mindy helping Nelson out with this campaign, but Mindy is definitely not into it. There's a nighttime exterior, and judging by the street lamps, I think it's somewhere downtown. The interior has signs that say Clean Up Boulder and Pure Power. There's a man with a Pure Power arm patch, and he walks by. The camera follows him and pans to show other people wearing that patch. Mork enters dressed like Nelson, from his glasses to his briefcase. The audience applauds, including whistles. Mork approaches a man in a blue checked shirt who's writing something in a notebook on the lectern. He says, "Hi there, concerned voter. Put her there," and they shake hands. The man says he doesn't think he knows Mork. Mork says, "Of course you do. I just said, 'Hi there, concerned voter. Put her there,'" and they shake again. Mork says that he represents Nelson Flavor, and he opens his jacket to reveal a black and white picture of Nelson doing 2 V for victory signs. I assume, because it wouldn't be peace signs with Nelson. Mork says this is an honor he doesn't take lightly. The man asks if Mork is sure he's in the right place. Mork says indeed he is. Keep Boulder clean. That's our motto. It's a noble aim, and Nelson's one of the cleanest. And then he flashes the picture again. He says that people come from miles around just to sniff Nelson. He is so clean that he makes Debbie Boone look like a sweat hog. And I did laugh at that line because it was so topical. He puts a campaign badge on the man and says that it was nice chatting with him. He goes over to a blonde woman who's wearing a blazer, a skirt, and heels. He tells her that Nelson is for purity. Mork thinks it's an idea whose time has come. He asks her what she thinks. She says, "I like where you're coming from." He tells her, "I like where you've been." She looks confused. A middle-aged man with a voice of authority comes over and says Mork is new.
You know, that's an interesting concept. Let's talk about that. Let's rap. Let's share energy. All right.
Welcome to our meeting. I'm Jim Blake.
I'm Mork Blank.
This man is played by Ed Peck, who at that time would have been very recognizable as a recurring character on Happy Days, Officer Kirk, who symbolized authority and police persecution. He was usually butting heads with Fonzie, but the other characters would fight him as well. So I thought that was an interesting casting choice to bring that in. When he was on Laverne and Shirley, he was simply a Packer fan, and it wasn't this sort of association of authoritarianism. So this gives us a nice contrast of characters, although of course Mork is channeling Nelson here. And I like that Mork uses the last name of Blank, because of course he has to have a last name. Mork says that he's representing Nelson Flavor. Jim asks who Nelson is. Mork says he's a concerned politician, as you can see here, and then he flashes the picture again. And he says that Nelson thinks that Boulder should be cleaned up whichever way you want. The man in the blue shirt calls this man Jim, and so this man excuses him and goes over to the other man and the blonde woman. The man in the blue shirt says he doesn't know about this guy. Jim says, "Leave him to me, Prescott." Prescott was played by Tom Kindle, who had previously appeared as Rick on Mork's Greatest Hits, and that was the friend of the bully. He would have another unsympathetic role in season 3. The woman is played by Nancy Steen, who would start writing for Happy Days in 1982 until the last season, and she also appeared on screen in Happy Days in 1984. Interestingly, all 3 characters are listed by their last names in the closing credits, although we do get full names in a later scene, and I thought that was an interesting distancing technique. But I will mostly refer to them by their first names because that's what I do with characters with this show in general, with the exception of Mr. Bickley, of course. Jim goes back to Mork and says, "This politician friend of yours, has he got a lot of influence?" Mork says he will when he has more groups like yours backing him. Jim thinks that Flavor is a good American name. He asks Mork what Nelson thinks of the race problem. Mork says that Nelson believes that he should be ahead of everybody else, obviously taking this as the race for city council. The woman says that that's what they believe. Jim says they're a white bread group and they think there's too much rye and pumpernickel in the world. Mork says, then you'll like Nelson, he's well-bred and no crumb, and the audience applauds. As the woman closes the door, Jim asks when they can meet this friend of Mork's. Mork says, how soon can you spit? And then he suggests tomorrow morning at his place. Jim thinks this sounds good. The meeting is about to start, and Jim invites Mork to join them. Prescott is passing out white hoods with horns on them. Jim says that they can give Mork the beginning indoctrination, and Mork says, we were sent to learn, and I wondered if that was maybe like he's talking about working we? The audience laughs as people are putting on the hoods. Jim tells Mork to try a hood on for size. Mork says, oh, dress up, do you have a Frankenstein mask? And Jim angrily says, there are no Steins allowed in here. Mork takes off the glasses and says it's nice to see young people dressing up again. He puts on the hood as we fade to the next scene. I don't remember from the time, but I think that there would have been some sort of TV guide indication that this was a hate group. I don't know how much detail they would have gone into at the time, but the studio audience catches on pretty quickly, and they mostly seem amused that there is this KKK-like organization in Boulder. It's sort of being played for laughs, like the way the hoods have horns. But I'll talk about that more as we go along, the audience reactions. There's a daytime exterior of the house, and it's presumably the next morning. There's a plate of cookies on a tray on the wicker chest. So I don't know if Mindy actually baked. I think it's more likely she ran out to the store and bought some cookies. She's organizing coffee cups on the kitchen counter. She's wearing a peasant dress, so she's dressed up some, but not a lot. Nelson and Mork are in their usual outfits. They're sitting on opposite ends of the couch. Nelson says to think that this group is coming all the way over here just to see him. And then he asks for a tissue, even though he's sitting right next to the tissue box. So Mindy comes over and grabs one and hands it to him. Nelson hasn't been this deeply touched since the Waltons Thanksgiving special, and he blows his nose on the tissue. There would be a Waltons Thanksgiving special in 2022. Obviously, Nelson is not referring to that. I don't remember any specific Waltons holiday episodes or movies, but certainly that would have been in character for the long-running, wholesome family show set in the Great Depression. Mindy sits on the couch arm by Nelson. She says to Mork that he hasn't really told them much about what went on at the meeting last night. We never do find out specifics. It's just sort of left to the viewer imagination. Maybe they didn't want to present the actual indoctrination. By the way, I thought it was interesting that it was referred to as indoctrination, and that's not a red flag from Mork. Mork says they're a small bunch of people who have some fantastic ideas about how to get the trash out of Boulder. Mindy says, well, that's good. And she's really glad that he's met some new people. So this is a continuing thing that Mindy does want Mork to make friends. Mork says he thinks he's a better person for having known them, even though he just met them last night. We will see that they are definitely not having a good influence on him, although I guess in the long run, you could say that he's a better person for having met them. Nelson says, color me giddy. It's moments like these that make the struggle, the sacrifice, and the sucking up worthwhile. You know, it's only 3 people coming over. Yes, they're apparently an environmental group, but even if they weren't white supremacists, is he really that desperate for support that he's giddy? Somebody rings the doorbell, and as they all stand, Mork says that that's his friends. And again, Mork just makes friends so quickly. Nelson asks Mindy if his smile is on straight. Mork opens the door to the 3 committee members that had lines, and he does their pure power sign, which is putting your fingers as horns to your head. Mork tells Mindy that that's our slogan. She says catchy. And I don't think she knows yet what they mean by pure power. She just thinks it's an odd slogan. She might think it's like, pure water, pure air. Mork closes the door and introduces Mindy and Nelson to his new friends. Mindy thinks he forgot something, so he says, 3 friends, meet Mindy and Nelson. Jim Blake introduces himself and his associates, Helen Anderson and Lloyd Prescott. Helen says they're the officers of the committee to clean up Boulder. Nelson goes over and shakes Jim's hand. He says he's proud to know him, and he calls him Sir. He shakes hands of Miss Anderson and Prescott. He seems to be assuming that Helen is unmarried, although later he'll call her ma'am. Mindy makes them all sit down and says she'll get them some coffee. Jim says that's a good idea. Mindy asks how they take it. Lloyd says, any way but black. And he and Jim laugh together, and Jim pats his back. He tells Nelson that Lloyd is a card, a whole deck as a matter of fact. Jim pats Nelson's back and briefly puts his hand on his shoulder. He says Mork's been telling them about Nelson. He says that Nelson is a true American. Nelson takes off his glasses and says, "Mr. Blake, I believe that the American people are crying out for leadership, and I want to give them something to cry about." He puts his glasses back on. Helen says, "I like where he's coming from," so that's her catchphrase. Nelson does the horns and says, "Pure power to you too, ma'am." And she says, "Back at ya," and she does the horns. As Nelson and Jim sit, Lloyd says talk is cheap. He wants to know how Nelson is different from any other politician. Nelson says, "Well, if I don't know, how would you?" So again, not only does he have no positions, he's pretty upfront about this. Holding the tray of coffee cups, Mindy says Nelson is very concerned with protecting the environment, although of course we got mixed messages on this in a previous episode or two. Lloyd says, "So what?" which makes Mindy start to get suspicious. Nelson confides in Mork that he's worried that he's just lost some brownie points. Mork says not to worry about it. It's time for selling of flavor.
Friends, are you looking for that special someone for your cause? Well, here he is, Nelson Flavor. Yes, he's a true American leader. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, a true media honey. Yes, you've heard the phrase, Nixon's the one. Well, he's one, too. Talk about character, he sure is. Look at that nose. Yes, Nelson Flavor, no artificial ingredients added. Come on now, check him out today. Paid for by the Friends of Flavor.
So we get Mork doing another spiel, parodying political ads, and he doesn't realize that saying that Nelson is blonde and blue-eyed is not just saying that he's all-American, but it's got this racial aspect to it, which would appeal to this group. He quotes the "Nixon is one" slogan, which was made fun of at the time. I have Mad magazines to prove that. Continuing Mork's fascination with Nixon. Jim chuckles and slaps Nelson on the back. He says that Nelson has a staunch supporter there, meaning Mork. As Mindy holds the tray so people can take cups, she says that she thinks that Nelson and their group would work really well together. Jim says from what Mork says, they're certainly on the same wavelength. Mork can't wait till they teach Nelson what they taught him. This town really needs some cleaning up. Nelson says, "I'm your man." Lloyd says, "He's okay with me, Jim." And of course Helen says, "I like where he's coming from." By now, Nelson is holding a cup, and he asks how exactly they'd like him to help clean up Boulder. Jim thinks they should start with the Spicks. Mindy and Nelson spit out their coffee. There's laughter and applause. Mindy says, "The what?" And Helen cheerfully says, "The taco benders." Jim knows that there aren't too many of them living here right now, but he wants them out. Boulder is for Americans. Helen thinks then they should go after the Nips, Gooks, and Bagel Breath. Mindy says she can't believe this. Lloyd says then they can smear the Krauts, Pollocks, Beaners, and Jungle Bunnies. So they have insulted quite a few groups in just a minute or so. Nelson says he was thinking more in terms of better water quality.
I don't know what these so-called Americans taught you, Mork, but I think it's ugly and disgusting. It just so happens that Nelson and I are both part Polish.
Polish men?
That's right. Our grandmother came all the way to this country from Warsaw.
Oh, come on, hardy har harsky.
Is this true Flavor?
Not necessarily.
Of course it's true. Now, I think you all had better leave.
We'll be glad to leave. Let's get out of this pigsty.
Even at the time, I wondered, does this mean Cora is Polish? I've redone the family trees. This still does not completely work out, but there are two different possibilities. One is that Cora did emigrate from Poland, and then she married a man named Mr. La Follette. At some point, she became Cora Hudson. They had Nelson's crazy mother, who married Mr. Flavor and had a daughter as well. Cora also had a son who now lives in Boston, and a daughter named Elizabeth who married Fred and had Mindy. The alternative is that Fred's mother came over from Poland. She married Mr. McConnell. They had Nelson's crazy mother who married Mr. Flavor and had Nelson and his sister. We'll also find out that Fred has a brother, but I don't think that's come up directly yet. Fred, of course, married Elizabeth. She still has a brother who lives in Boston, and we still have that confusion about the Lafayette Hudson thing. But it is clear that this Polish grandmother is shared by Nelson. And he doesn't want to admit it, although Mindy is proud of her background. We are getting the idealistic and angry, indignant, righteous Mindy, which is always good and definitely in a good cause here. Mork is amused by the situation. He doesn't really get what's going on. And I like the little detail that Lloyd steals a cookie before he leaves. Even though Jim sees this as a pigsty, Lloyd doesn't mind eating food Mindy's Polish hands have touched. Mork tells Mindy not to be so rough on his friends. Mindy says, well, if they're your friends, why don't you just leave with them? He shrugs and says, all right. He grabs his coat and says that while he's out, he'll pick her up a Polish six-pack, 4 beers, and he laughs. The audience applauds and whistles, and Mindy looks shocked. She says, Mork's turned into a bigot, and Nelson nods. Then we get another daytime exterior at the deli. Remo is waiting on customers at one table, and Jeannie and Mindy are drinking coffee, as Mindy seems to be concluding her story. She says before she knew it, she threw Mork out. Jeannie says that doesn't sound like the Mork she knows. Mindy says that Mork is so impressionable, and these people really know how to poison your mind. Jeannie says she didn't know there were any hate groups in Boulder. Mindy didn't either. It's hard to see them, but they're there. They hide behind the flag. So I thought that was interesting that she made the connection of bigots misusing patriotism. Mindy says, poor Nelson, I wish you could have seen him. He was so humiliated when he found out he was about to support that group. And then she and Jeannie chuckle. Even though this is an upsetting experience, she's finding humor in it. I'm surprised that she feels bad for Nelson when he didn't stand up for their grandmother, but she's not as upset as she was in the morning. Remo comes over and says, so you're Polish, huh? I should have known with a last name like McConnell, so lampshading that. She says her grandmother was Polish. Jeannie asks why people make fun of the Polish, and at that time, Polish jokes were very common. The gist of them was generally that Polish people were stupid. Mindy says it's probably for the same reason they make fun of other ethnic groups. It's easier to put someone down who's different than try to understand him. Remo says it's sort of a shame. And you might think it's sort of a shame that people are making ethnic jokes, but no, the shame apparently is that some of these Polish jokes are funny. And he heard one about this priest, this minister, and this cabbage smuggler. Jeannie stops him from telling it. Mork comes in carrying a big paper bag. Jeannie tells Remo they should make themselves scarce, although they don't actually leave the room. They just go over behind the counter. Mork greets Mindy with dobre, which apparently is Slavic for all right. He holds out the bag and says he bought her a little gift, something special just for her. And so you might think, oh, Mork is making peace. She reluctantly takes the bag and removes a light bulb. He says he wanted to see how many of her relatives it would take to screw it in. Light bulb joke. There's laughter and applause. She drops the bulb back into the bag. Mork is very amused. He tells a joke about a Polish man who locked his keys in the car and it took him 2 weeks to get his family out. Then he tells a joke about 2 Polish duck hunters. One said, Sash, how are we going to get any birds? And Sash replied, maybe we're not throwing the dog high enough. And he does these with accents. Mork is very amused by himself. There's laughter, applause, and whistles. And so throughout this, the studio audience, maybe they didn't know how to take this. Robin Williams is funny, Mork is funny, he's telling jokes, so we laugh. Even though the jokes aren't really that funny, slurs aside. And I think there's also just sort of this thing of people breaking taboos is sort of exciting and titillating. And even though, like I said, All in the Family had been on for almost 9 years at that point, but I think there was a certain shock value hearing this on Mork and Mindy. That said, I've commented very recently that Mork was making jokes about Al Jolson and slaves not that long ago, and I don't know the shooting orders. Throughout Robin Williams' career, he would make questionable ethnic jokes and impersonations. So it's a little bit hard to know how to take the message of this episode, at least the secondary message of the episode, how to take that. But the audience is just enjoying this, at least the ones that are reacting. We don't hear any startled gasps or people sounding disgusted or anything. They just seem to find it cute. Then Mork says he'll change the subject. He asks what's wrong with Ireland geographically, and the punchline is it's above sea level. As Mindy takes her cup over the counter, Mork asks why Greeks don't have freckles, and the punchline is because they keep sliding off. Mindy says that's enough. Mork asks what's wrong and says these are funny. Jeannie comes over and asks if Mindy is okay, and Mindy says no. So I thought that was a nice friendship moment, that Jeannie is feeling protective towards Mindy, even when the person that's hurting her is Mork. And then Remo comes over and asks what's going on. Mork tells them what his friends say about when Italians eat Chinese food. They use wop sticks. Then Mork asks Mindy if she knows how to save a darky from drowning. She says no, and he says good. She tells him to shut up, and he again asks what's wrong. He says his friends laugh at these. She asks if he sees anyone here laughing. Remo says he almost laughed at the one about the dog, and Jeannie elbows him. And I will say, of the jokes, that comes closest to being funny in just sort of an absurd way. Remo is sort of the audience representative here, that even though he's Italian, he does not worry about what we would now call political correctness. He enjoys ethnic jokes because he's just a regular guy. But when they start to insult Italians, then he gets a little bit more offended. Mindy tells Mork to sit down because they have to talk right now. Even though they were just sitting, had the whole thing of them going over the counter, and now they come back. The Da Vincis step away and go back behind the counter. Mindy asks if Mork knows what bigotry is. Mork says that's what they have in Italian forests. Bigotry! And he does it in sort of a Chico Marx kind of way. And there's laughter and applause, and we cut to Remo laughing. So apparently he will laugh at some jokes about Italians. Mindy says bigotry is when people hate other people just because they're different. Mork says he doesn't hate anybody. His friends just laugh at them because they say they're inferior. And I think the they that they're laughing at is the jokes, and then the they that inferior is the different groups. Really, Mindy should not have this next part of the conversation in a deli where their friends are in earshot. I don't remember any other customers at this point, but she quietly tells Mork she doesn't know about it where he comes from, but here on Earth, they're all supposed to be created equal. The only people who are inferior are those that say other people are. He starts to say that his friends tell him, and then she says his friends could fertilize Iowa with their mouths. They're a bunch of sick, stupid creeps who could do a lot of harm. Mork says they're just telling jokes. She says they use jokes as weapons until they have enough guts to buy bullets. She wouldn't be surprised if 40 years ago in Germany somebody said, "Did you hear the one about the 2 Jews?" Before long, that's almost all that were left. So she's making a very definite connection between jokes against groups and genocide. And Mork apparently knows about Nazis because he guesses that she's right, and these aren't funny. He wonders if there aren't any people on Earth who are lazy, shiftless, pushy, dumb, and inscrutable. She says, of course, in every race, creed, and color. Aren't there people like that on Ork? He says, not anymore. They sent him here, and there's laughter and applause. So Mork thinks of himself as lazy, shiftless, pushy, dumb, and inscrutable. He says he didn't mean to hurt anybody. He just wanted to tell a few jokes, and he's sorry. She takes his hand and says she knows that he is. She says, don't you think there are a few people here you should apologize to? And he says, yeah, everybody. The only other 2 people here are the Da Vincis, but I think he means he's offended everyone by telling these offensive jokes. There's a nighttime exterior of the house, and we can see someone going in the front entrance. It'll turn out to be more than one person because we go to the apartment and Mork thanks Mindy for taking him to the movies. He says, you Polish people sure are generous. So now he's indulging in so-called positive stereotypes.
Everything is ruined.
Maybe we've been robbed, Min.
No, I don't think there's a stereo on the TV. Oh, look at my dishes and my plates.
Oh, no. It's not Fern.
My dad bought me this when I moved in here. Oh, Mork.
It's all right, Min. You can sleep on your side for a while.
I wonder if they did anything to the attic.
Let me check.
Oh! Oh, Mork, I'm scared.
So this is very clearly not just vandalism, it's a hate crime because we've got the effigy wearing Mindy's peasant dress and the sign that has the word Polak on it. And it feels very personal because we've got Mork upset about the plant he calls Fern, and there's a lamp that Fred gave Mindy as a housewarming gift. Though this is presented in a somewhat kid-friendly setting, it is upsetting to see the home of regular characters attacked. Mork takes her hand and tells her to stay home, lock the door, and he'll be right back. He's got a little score to settle with his friends. He leaves, and she locks the door. There's that same exterior of that place with the street lamps, and Mork bursts into the cleaning up Boulder headquarters. And we get music emphasizing his acts of revenge. He says that he's going to show them pure power. He knocks down the blinds, he shatters the windows and the lights, and he breaks the lectern. But then he also does things like scatter paper from the cabinet and pop the top off the coffee maker. It's an odd mix of really destructive acts and things that could be fixed in a few minutes. There are frame pictures of the officers of the group on the wall, and he sets those on fire. He has mud drip down the Clean Up Boulder sign, and he makes the letters fall off the Pure Power sign so that it just becomes PU, which is what he thinks of them. And this is a rare glimpse of Mork using his Orkin powers for destruction, which I don't think we've really seen since episode 0 when he wanted to destroy Arnold's and all the people in it. This time it's violence, not just for the fun of it, but for revenge and a good cause. And the audience is definitely here for it. They are cheering him on. It's very cathartic. Even though they didn't seem that upset about the white supremacy group, they like seeing Mork act out like this. Mindy runs in and asks Mork what he's done. They hold hands, and she tells him that violence just leads to more violence. Mork now thinks he's done the wrong thing. He's becoming like them. This is how wars start. She tells him that we can't fight hate with hate. And her reason for this is because we're just not good at it. Not that hate is wrong, but that we're not as good at vandalism as they would be. He asks her what the answer is. She doesn't know, and she wishes she did. She was taught to fight hate with love and understanding. He says those are good odds, 2 against 1. People come in not only the white hoods, but white robes. The robes have the Pure Power symbol on it. These people are also wearing black gloves. Jim demands to know what the hell Mork is doing. Mork says he's making a mess, and he chuckles, so he's trying to defuse the situation. Lloyd says they're going to make a mess out of Mork and the Polak. Mork guesses that this is a job for love, and they says, "Oh, hon, would you look at this?" And he says it's so unkempt. He tells them that you people must be tired after a hard day of hating various and sundry ethnic groups. Why don't you sit down? I'll get your pipes, slippers, and kerosene. So it's like he's trying to be a good housewife towards them. Jim says, "All right, Prescott, let's get him," and Lloyd swings a chain. Mork tells Mindy that he doesn't think love worked. Maybe he should try a little understanding.
That feels strange.
Me too.
Look, Blake is black. Look, what happened?
Well, just kind of reprogram their genes.
Mork, are they going to stay this way?
Well, only until they learn about brotherhood without the hood. Goodbye, everybody. Welcome to America.
So now he's using his Orkin powers to change the appearances of the bigots. Not only do some of them change races, but some of them just seem to have like blue or whatever color makeup on. It's a nice thought, not terribly original, but oh, if only bigots experienced being non-white, then they would understand. I do wish that they had not used the touch of Oriental music, as it would have been called, for the reveal when Helen is now Asian. I don't get how this would even work. Like, somehow they learn their lesson and then they change back immediately? What happens with their families? How is any of this explained? How does this not get back to Mork and get him in trouble? Or are they so embarrassed that they just go on the run with their new identities? Not that I'm that concerned for them, but I am just wondering logistically how this would work. There's a nighttime exterior of the house. Mork summons Orson. He speaks very sweetly and he says, "Come in, nicest person in the history of the universe." Mork is surprised since Mork usually greets him with some slur about Orson's size. Mork says, "Not anymore, oh wonderful being. I've learned that slurs can be harmful." Orson says he's actually gotten used to Mork's remarks. Mork says he's glad to hear that, "You're Porky Pigness." And then he does a little bit of a Porky Pig imitation. So apparently some insults are okay and they won't lead to genocide. Orson demands Mork's report. This week, a group of people taught him a new emotion called hate. Now, if you remember back several episodes, Mork already knew about hate because of the Necrotons, and he was explaining how their emotions work. So that and some other things in this episode made me feel like if they're going to do this episode, it would have worked better in season 1 because Mork just knows too much about Earth and about earthly emotions and earthly politics and so on. By this point, it didn't make sense, and I feel like Orson would have known about hate as well. Orson wonders if hate is anything like love. Mork says, "Let's just say they use the sheets for different purposes," so another suggestive line. Mork quotes a poet as saying, "Love builds bridges between people, hate binds them up," and he does it sort of theatrically, but I couldn't find that this is an actual quote. Orson wonders why this group that Mork mentioned teaches hate. Mork says certain people on Earth can only feel up by putting other people down. He says that when we, meaning Orkans, call someone ambitious, these people call them pushy. Rather than carefree, they say lazy bum. Rather than different, they say hippie freak. Although I don't know how many people were still saying hippie freak in 1979 or 1980. And then when bigots call someone inscrutable, we say, "What's that?" Even though Mork had said that he was known for being inscrutable. I don't understand his inscrutability. It seems to Orson that hate affects vision and distorts what people see. Mork says it does.
Wish they could make a contact lens for the mind so these people would see that when you mix all the different varieties of earthlings together, you get this incredible human rainbow that stems from the same source, and each person has his own pot of gold. Till next week, sir. Nanu, sayonara, shalom, do svidaniya, ciao, ding long salvi. From all of us here on this wonderful little planet of sand, catch you later.
So Mork is making a plea for diversity, and he's using mixed metaphors like contact lenses, although the image of a rainbow is still a positive one, and of course plays into Mork and Robin Williams' imagery. Mork apparently knows many Earth languages, at least a few words in them, even though until this episode he didn't realize why telling ethnic jokes might be offensive. I kind of remember this episode from the time, particularly that last scene with Mork being destructive and the bigots changing colors. And like I said, the thing of, wait, Cora's Polish? Why has this never come up before? It is definitely odd watching it now, over 40 years later. There definitely were white supremacist groups in the 70s and 80s. But it was also a time when I think that we felt that this was fading away, that bigotry was something that we would move beyond. Sadly, the last 15 years have shown us otherwise. It's hard to imagine a studio audience laughing at all this. I think that there would have been actually more discomfort now. The episode makes some good points, but it is pretty muddled. Its heart is in the right place. Obviously they wanted to take this on and tied it in with Nelson's campaign, and so he's given some stuff to do, so that's nice for his character, although he's pretty much a coward, and he kind of fades out. We have him trying to get involved with this group and then realizing what a mistake that is, and then we don't see him for the rest of the episode. The Da Vinci's are used not particularly well, but like I said, I did like the friendship that we see between Mindy and Jeannie. I continue to believe that Jeannie is treated better by the writers than Remo is. They don't really quite know what to do about Remo. He's just a regular guy and he's stupid, but he's a good guy. And I don't remember if he ever got better material. The episode does have some good acting by Pam Dawber, and I like that although the episode isn't about her, she's the voice of reason, but she's also very emotional because this is a very personal topic to her. It literally hits home when she's hung in effigy and her apartment is trashed. Not crazy about Mork's arc in this episode. Again, I can kind of see what they were going for, but it just feels really off that he would get that deep in and so quickly with this group, not experience any red flags. Despite his own ethnic jokes, he is an open, welcoming, accepting person, like when he befriended the Russian immigrant. It just is odd to see him think that this is okay. Whether jokes are just jokes and they're harmless, you can tell an offensive joke without wanting to kill a group. But that said, hateful jokes can be a slippery slope leading to racism and other forms of bigotry. I feel like the jokes that Mork has told in the past were never meant to be hurtful. Here, Mindy tells him to stop. She's not laughing. She's being genuinely hurt, and he's just like, can't you take a joke? And not understanding. It's a wake-up call when the apartment is vandalized. I rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 egg scale, which measures how well it delivers what I'm looking for in the series. This is a tricky one because it's a very flawed episode, but it has potential. I mean, if you're gonna do a plot like that, which, you know, is obviously, when I read that description, I'm thinking like, well, this just really doesn't sound funny. And they tried. Again, it's one of these episodes of season 2. I mean, that could be the motto of season 2. They tried. Sometimes they succeed. The energy was pretty good. I was surprised. There are some season 2 episodes that just feel really tired. This one, people were pretty into it. I thought the guest cast did nicely. Ed Peck, of course, it's an easy thing for him. Nancy Steen and Tom Kendall as his associates. They did what they did. They're pretty much plain stock characters. There is no depth to them. We don't know why they hate. They just hate. Not that I expected insight in a half-hour sitcom, but I actually kind of like that they're presented as normal. If you didn't know that they were bigots, they would seem like so many other sitcom characters. I thought that was well done. I would say on a 0 to 4 scale, this is a 2.5. It definitely has some weaknesses, but there were worse episodes in this season. I also rate each of these episodes on a 0 to 4 heart scale, which measures how well it supports the romance between Mork and Mindy. And this one, it just really broke my heart because Mork is so insensitive to Mindy throughout. It's not romantic. Kind of like the episode where he picked a fight with her, except there he was hurting her because he had been told that fights are good for a relationship. Here he doesn't even seem to be fully aware of the effect he's having on her. They do reconcile. There's some touches and kinder words. And so I'm going to go back down to a half star for this. Definitely one of the least romantic episodes of the season. Is this episode skippable? Kind of. If you're invested in Nelson at all, probably want to watch it. If you want to see these issues addressed, not particularly well, but sincerely, yeah, tune in. But if you skip it, you'll probably be okay. 2.5 eggs, half a heart. This is Paula Schaffner with The Night They Raided Minsky's. Nanu, Nanu. Did you hear the one about the 5 orkins and the light bulb?
Many other ladies I have lied to, many were my happy nights, and yet the night they raided Minsky's is the night I can't forget, and the night they ended Prohibition. Oh, Delancey Street was plenty wet, yet the night they raided Minsky's is the night I can't forget. We were watching Phoebe from Gapery in her artistic dance, when just by chance her dress tore in two. What was she to do? And then a whistle blew, followed by the cops, and every man turned pale. Oh, what a brawl, they arrested us all. Phoebe finished her dance in jail. Now I'm very old with just my memories. Now my biggest thrill's a cigarette. But the night they raided Minsky's is the night I can't forget.